So we are in a short series that tracks along with verses from the beloved hymn "For the Beauty of the Earth." And the first lines of each verse have something that within the earth and the creation is beautiful and is a beautiful part of God's creative love. And of course, it starts with "For the Beauty of the Earth itself." So we'll track along with that for the next couple of weeks, and we sang the odd verses of the song this week. We'll sing the even verses next week. They kind of line up nicely with that. So it is my joy to reflect on the earth as an expression of God's unfailing love. One of our good friends in college, with both Kelsey and I, had a double major, which is not particularly unusual, but had a double major in environmental science and theology, which maybe in a Green Faith Sanctuary church makes sense, but for many people it sounded strange when you would first hear it, and she always had to explain it as a part of why she had a double major. To her credit, she really worked hard to graduate with two very different degree programs. She had a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Arts by the time the 4 years was over, because almost none of the core credits from those two degrees overlapped. The basics for the science and the arts were a little different. And it shows, even in a curriculum, how little those two areas are perceived to intersect. And nowadays, I sense that she was really on to something deeply true about the relationship between us, between God, and between creation. And it's an odd stereotype that often Christians associated with our religion don't tend to necessarily be as proactive on the environmental front in taking care of the environment. The tension in environmental theology is not hard to find. All you have to do is Google Christians in the environment, and all kinds of interesting things come up. And the online discourse seems to pit the well-being of the earth at odds with the well-being of the Christian world view, which is sometimes hard to understand, as I would contend the Christian worldview relies on a world to view. And the earth, and we as Christians in our scriptural background are led to see the earth itself as an act of God's creative love that we are called to be stewards of. So we are talking about seeing the earth, the creation, as part of God's expression of beauty and love for each of us, for all of us, and for the joy of creating this world that we live in. So, as the psalmist says, the earth is full of God's unfailing love. Now, my surprise at the apparent tension is due to the fact that the Bible consistently speaks to the relationship between God's people and the land that they live on, especially in the Old Testament. Frequently, the laws reference how our sin desecrates, defiles, or destroys the land itself. There is we find spiritual meaning in our relationships with the land speaks to how our relationship is going with each other and with God as well. In Genesis and Exodus, the bounty or barrenness of the land and working it properly is used to help express God's blessing or the lack of God's blessing on the people's behavior. The creation is the source of worship through the offerings of many, going back to the story of Cain and Abel. Revelation, it is the source of revelation for Moses, shade in times of exhaustion for Elijah, evidence of God's sovereignty for Job in the midst of his trials, and is the subject of countless psalms where nature points to its loving and sovereign creator. In the New Testament as well, Paul writes about how we are connected to the earth and how redemption has a liberating and rejuvenating effect not only on us, but on the creation itself, on the earth that surrounds us. We are all connected. Jesus finds gardens to pray in, faces temptation in the wilderness, and uses agricultural metaphors in many, many parables, because that is a means in which people would understand, an arena in which people would often connected with, much more than we do today. And so we come to a psalm of praise in Psalm 33 this morning that sums up what I'm trying to say quite nicely, I think. The Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of God's unfailing love. By the word of God, the heavens were made, and their starry host by the breath of God's mouth. Not only are we connected to the earth by our actions, but even by our very existence and life, having life. God said the word, and we have become to exist. God breathed life, and we all live. Together, we are all a part of this divine expression of creative love and relationship. The earth is full of God's unfailing love. What a line. And to be honest, this is the basic premise for environmental theology in the first place. The foundation is laid with how the story begins, our very story of creation, of existing, with the good and then very good blessing that is the beginning of our story as part of God's creation. And Psalms 33 goes so far as to draw a link between the creation and justice and righteousness. When we as a community of faith are figuring out how to live out our baptismal covenant to resist evil and injustice in whatever forms they present themselves, this includes how we think and approach the rest of creation and the earth. Not placing it above human life in terms of priority, but advocating for the fullness of life and thriving of both, and believing that these are not mutually exclusive, but are actually mutually inclusive, because both are connected. Environmental theology, wherein we can learn about connection between creatures and creation, wherein we can find nature in all of its beauty and intricacy pointing to God, and wherein we can see a visible and tangible expression of God's love and creativity, and wherein we can participate in the act of creating, cultivating, and caring to learn something of the nature of God who cares for us, created us, and nurtures us. It is, in fact, the way that we were created to be within this creation. So what can we do? What should we do as a result of thinking theologically, thinking through environmental theology? Shall we continue to use reusable grocery bags? Sure. LED light bulbs? A wise investment. Invest in renewable energy? Righteous. And maybe to that end, you can connect with our very own Ken Glossbrenner about ways to support policies that protect this expression of God's unfailing love and give us a home to care for and have life in the first place. That's definitely important. On the pastoral spiritual side, I say, begin by planting something. It can be something very small. It could be a houseplant. It could be something you hope flowers by the fall or the end of the summer. Maybe a small garden in which you hope to guide it into yielding some fruit. Because in caring for the creation in this unique way, we learn something about the nature of God as a nurturer and learn how many ways things can go wrong when trying to bear something from seed to fruit. And I encourage us to go for a walk somewhere that we might usually drive. Experience the air, which opens up a whole nother can of worms in this particular day and age about, maybe you should talk to Ken. The air when it's safe to do so. Experience the sights and the smells of your local environment that you would not normally experience at your usual pace. I still get amazed when I walk out the back door sometimes at the house here and smell the ocean, because it's something so unique to this area. I encourage you, all of us, to explore parks in our area, to go to the beach, to see the amazing things that are out there. Because over time, and depending on where our lenses are casting our eyes and on what news we experience and consume, we are often easily led to feel that maybe God's world is not filled with God's unfailing love. But for the beauty of the earth, we are reminded constantly that even in spite of us sometimes and oftentimes, the world really is filled with signs of God's unfailing, beautiful love. The amazing thing about environmental theology is that we do not need to invent the teachings and the lessons. They are already being taught and already being expressed all around us, waiting to be connected with and discovered. So, I encourage us, for the beauty of the earth, to go out and discover that the earth is indeed full of God's unfailing love as we are continuing to build and see the world through God's lenses that highlight these expressions of God's love, that highlight the expression of God's love in the creation of each and every single one of us. But that is a later verse in the song. So, my friends, let us look to the creation, the very first part of God's breathing life into the chaos and the void, to create something beautiful that reminds us of God's unfailing love every day.